We started this series to determine how good teams are for this World Cup. For episode 2, we have Australia, Afghanistan, and the reigning champions, England. If you haven't seen it yet, episode 1, we had India, Netherlands, and Bangladesh. The link to that is in the notes. But for this episode, let's look at 2 of the favourites and also the hipsters' choice team. This video is brought to you by Wicket Cricket Manager. For those of you new to these team mats, you want your teams to be stretched out as far as possible when it comes to batting and pushed in as far as possible when it comes to bowling. This is a good team. Obviously, for the teams you hate, you want them to be in as close as possible when it comes to the 3 batting sections and pushed out as far as possible when it comes to bowling. We've split it up into the power play, the middle, and the death. And all of this is just a shortcut to see teams' strengths and weaknesses. These are all ratings and they're not averages or runs per over, but we use both of those metrics to come up with our overall marks. Obviously, bilateral ODIs are a little bit random now, so we have looked at the last 3 years of the World Cup teams when they were playing against other World Cup teams. Australia pulled their team together so late in such a haphazard way that actually working out any real patterns can be silly. But they do have consistent strengths and weaknesses that we have seen before. In their batting, their top order has been absolutely incredible at staying in, and while staying in a lot, they've also managed to score at a decent rate. I have them listed as the best team in the power play with the bat, just ahead of India. Now, of course, all of this and this might be complicated by the Travis Head injury, but that's very early. We don't know a lot about that yet. The real issue is that none of this carries on. That incredible start just kind of falls away really badly in the middle. And it's not just that losing wickets as well, they're also not scoring at a particularly good rate, so it's certainly not from over-attacking. Based on the numbers, their middle is ranked slightly ahead of Afghanistan, which is not a place that you ever want to be with the bat. At the death is absolutely extraordinary because they have lost a lot of wickets in the middle, and then at the death they lose absolutely no wickets at all, and yet they don't get as much of a bump as you would like. Yet, if you do factor in average and runs per over altogether, they're probably the best death team, although I would say that South Africa probably has them just because of runs per over. With the ball, they do the all-important job of taking early wickets. That is weirdly the only time in the innings that they actually take wickets at a really good average, and they don't really back it up with a sensational economy here either. But as good as this is, I still only have them as the 4th best when it comes to average in this period. But their middle is pretty weak. They don't take a lot of wickets and they go at about a bulk ordinary rate as well. I think the reason they don't take as many wickets is because they are relying a lot on fifth bowlers who just aren't that good with the ball. But because they are not horrendous with economy, in fact they're marginally above par in this section, it's not actually killing them. The worst one is probably the death. The average is not all that important, but they do actually go above par again with the ball. And this is something that you wouldn't really expect from an Australian team. If you do look at the wickets and the economy combined, they are one of the worst teams when it comes to bowling at the death. However, we have to mention that Mitchell Starc might play in this World Cup. And if he has another great World Cup, and remember, he already has 2 great World Cups, that will be 3 great World Cups, which at that stage means he will be one of the greatest bowlers in World Cup history. However, it is hard to deny that they haven't got as many good death bowlers, and they flirted with bringing in death specialists for this tournament, like Nathan Ellis. The thing is, when looking at their bowling, especially the power play at the death, is there is always a touch of Avengers Assemble when you are looking at Australian bowling lineups, right? We know that they rest their players all the time and then they suddenly come in, but we expect them to perform at a very high level, and in some tournaments they have, and in others they haven't. On the overall rankings, I actually have them as the best team. Now, England has basically taken this cycle off, and India has played around a little bit, not to mention that New Zealand just has not been as good. But Australia have managed to try a bunch of new methods, rest players, experiment, and still be very, very good. That's not nothing. Have you ever wondered how I watch so much cricket? I use VPNs to log into accounts from all around the world. But because before, even simple things like when something exciting would happen in a match, I would rush over to social media, and when I got there, the clips would say something along the lines of, "This video is not available in your area." In fact, most of the coolest cricket stuff in the world at the moment is geo-blocked because some random board didn't sign a deal where you happen to live. If you're a hardcore cricket nerd, the only way is to have a VPN, and we suggest Surfshark. They will give you the speed of your favorite quick bowler. They're as inventive as a T20 batter after a bunch of dot balls, and they're as secure as a specialist wicketkeeper with the softest hands in the world. And guess what? The kind folks at Surfshark are going to give you a deal. Enter the promo code Kimber for an extra 3 months free at surfshark.deals/Kimber. There are probably other things that Surfshark can help you with, like data and identity theft and traceability and intrusive advertising. But for us, it is our best weapon against the evil cricket geoblock. Go to Surfshark and type my name in Kimber and get 3 months free today. Afghanistan's batting is just bad. They lose wickets at the top and also at the middle at an above average rate. It's obviously a lot worse in those first 10 overs, and that means that by the time they get to the death, they have absolutely no batting talent left at all. And of course that means that in all three parts of the innings, they are a below average batting team. Only the middle where they are, mediocre, just worse than that. Of course, the one good thing about being good at the middle is that that is a big part of their innings, right? It is 30 overs. The problem is that by the time they get to the death, they're not even using the last 10 overs at all, and they really haven't scored very quickly at all in the first 10. So being good in those middle 30 overs is really handy, but not if you are forfeiting the other 20 overs to be good. Afghanistan's bowling is understandably a lot better, although having said that, they are not very good in the power play. I think we can understand that. Years gone past, Afghanistan had a lot of good seamers. That's not really the case anymore, and their bowling has deteriorated when it comes to quicks. They're managing to keep a pretty decent economy here. That might be the spinners stepping up a little bit. But remember, this is the period where it's absolutely the most important to take wickets, and Afghanistan are not. If you're a bowling team, that is not a good sign. The middle is, unsurprisingly, their best part. They are absolutely fantastic at just regularly taking wickets through here, as I suppose you would be if you had Rashid Khan and team around him. And no one is scoring at them. This is just a remarkable period for them. They are so dominant. The good news is that they also manage to keep that up during the death. They take a few wickets, which is fine, but it's really the economy where I think they're most impressive at the death. This is a combination of their seamers and their spinners in tandem, working absolutely perfectly for them. Let's be honest here, overall, this is a team that just does not make a lot of runs. There's just no way of getting around that, right? They just don't make runs at any stage in their innings, and then they're not a plus bowling side all the way through, but for the last 40 overs, they are magnificent with the ball. I mean, looking at this, I'm pretty confident in saying they are the second worst batting team in the tournament, but they might also be the fourth best bowling team in the tournament, all things considered. They're a very confusing team from that perspective. And being that this tournament will be played on Indian pitches, at the very least you would expect their strengths as a bowling unit to actually stand up quite well. I mean, looking at this here, you would say they are one top order batter, maybe two if we're being honest, and some new ball wickets away from being a fantastic team. And I think the good thing is that they are so good in these two different middle periods, that is actually 60% of an ODI game, right? It's just how do they cheat and scrape and work out the other 40% of the game to be just as good? Because without fixing this and this specifically, and probably also this, they're basically just a spoiler team. They're going to be very dangerous, but they shouldn't win consistently. No team took off the last cycle more than England. I mean, Ben Stokes actually retired. It wasn't a real retirement, obviously, but you get the point. And Joe Root might as well have done the same, right? I mean, we barely saw him play at all. And because of that, England's numbers aren't as impressive as they probably should be. But they are certainly still a plus batting lineup, no matter how you look at it. In the power play, they haven't been averaging crazy numbers. Of course, they do attack more than other teams, so that is part of the reason. But also, Jason Roy hasn't been particularly good. But the averages haven't really affected their strike rate there. They have still managed to keep going and crushing teams at the top. However, this isn't the sort of crushing we're used to from England. The fact that Australia have gone past them in this period when it comes to scoring fast is an interesting fact. They're still probably rated either second or third in the power play with the bat, but this is a team who was absolutely blitzing before. And if you look over here, I think you'll understand why Jason Roy was left out. So there are some changes here, and it isn't as smooth as it was coming into the last World Cup. And Milan might help with the average, but will he help with the strike rate here? But England is still far quicker than anyone else in the guts of the innings. Even without Root, Morgan and Stokes as the machine that they had in the last World Cup, who were regularly not available, they still scored at a really good rate. But you can see that before they had a brilliant batting average in the middle, and it's not quite the same. However, two of those players will come back into this order. Root will finally find some form, and Stokes looked okay in that game the other day. So this should grow for the World Cup. But it should be pointed out, even with this average, because they are just so absolutely brilliant at striking so fast, I still have them ranked as the #1 team in the middle, even if they haven't had their major players available for them. What I did find interesting is that they haven't been quite as good at the end. You'll see that they're not losing a lot of wickets, which is something we didn't see before, because before they were throwing their bat at everything. It's not quite been the case in this cycle. And you can see that in the strike rate, they've actually come back to basically being a par death batting team. That's a very weird thing for an England team to be. Now, I do wonder if they've actually been preserving their wickets a little bit more because they haven't had those long batting lineups of before. And also they've been trialing a lot of new bowlers who maybe didn't have as much all-round skill. But certainly, this isn't quite the dominant death batting that we have seen from England prior. I think when looking at England's white ball success, we often underrate the fact that their new ball bowlers often do a lot of damage. It's a big part of their overall success. And of course, this already looks good, but they're a completely different proposition if Jofra Archer can bowl in the tournament. And it would look like he's only one injury away from that being a possibility. I do have them ranked first when it comes to wickets in the power play, but they're not as frugal as some of the other teams. But this is a far more important metric of these two. I think the bigger issue for England is the other part of their success was just regularly chipping away with wickets in the middle period. You could see that they are not doing that anymore. The Adil Rashid-Liam Plunkett partnership hasn't really been replaced. Rashid is taking his wickets at nearly 40 in the middle, and Wood just hasn't taken the sort of wickets in that role that Plunkett managed to do. And their game plan really relies on this a lot. And it was noticeable against New Zealand specifically recently how much they were prepared to gamble to get middle overs victims. So clearly they know that this has become a bit of a problem for them. The biggest weakness for England in their white ball dominant period has probably been death bowling. They just, outside of Jofra Archer anyway, haven't been able to find a regular bowler who could do this. They're about par at taking wickets, but they're above par when you look at overall. I would say that consistently this has been their biggest issue. Again, if Archer does come in midway through the tournament because of a well-planned injury, then this is something that can be fixed. But as their World Cup squad currently stands, I don't think they have any great death bowlers. Like, for instance, Sam Curran was incredible in the last T20 World Cup, but not very good in the IPL. We're talking about consistent threats at the death. Jofra Archer is their only choice. Although he's not actually technically a choice at the moment. And while this doesn't look terrible, they're definitely down the wrong end when it comes to runs per over at the death. I think the interesting thing of recent times is the fact that Australia have actually managed to outplay them a little bit, especially considering that both teams have been resting and trying different things. I mean, the fact that they just dropped Jason Roy and they weren't even sure about Harry Brook sort of tells you everything you need to know about their side. They seem to have a lot of bowlers in there because they're not 100% sure who they actually want to take the ball. There's also other questions like, is Rashid quick enough to take wickets in India? Will their new ball bowlers still give them an advantage on those surfaces? And can they hide some of their flaws at the death? In 2019, this was an ODI machine. Every single player knew exactly what their role was, and in most cases had been doing it for quite a long time coming into that World Cup. This one, it hasn't been the same. England has basically rested this entire cycle, and now they're trying to bring the team together. But the only weird thing I would add to this is that they still look reasonably good as a team on paper, even if there are some flaws here. And the last World Cup, they didn't actually play that well, and they still won it. Next video, we'll have Sri Lanka, New Zealand, South Africa, and Pakistan. So comment, like, subscribe. This is just the start of our World Cup campaign. We're still just warming up at the moment, waiting for our first fixture. So come back here practically every day during the World Cup for a global perspective on the biggest tournament in cricket.